Alright everyone, welcome to another edition of I Am an Outdoorsman. Today we are in Castillo De San Marcos, and which is in St. Augustine. This fort was built to protect St. Augustine from the French and British, initially also to protect them from the Native Americans in the area. So we are going in and checking out Castillo De San Marcos. So let's get outdoors. All right, interesting. There's obviously could have been a moat here, the way it looks, and they actually had a drawbridge that they could have pulled it closed and made it much more difficult to gain entry here into the fort. After the initial drawbridge, there were lots of places for people, soldiers protecting it, to have additional firing down on the second drawbridge. I'm not sure if this structure slid closed or not, but if so, it would have made it pretty tight. Here we are looking out past this watchtower, and that is the Atlantic Ocean out there. So that little spit there, the opening, would have been where enemy ships would have had to navigate through that very small opening in order to move into this harbor and attack the San Marcos.
Cover your ears, tápense los oídos.
There she blows. And this is the courtyard of Castillo De San Marcos. Pretty small little space for the number of men who would have been here serving. And it would also have been a location that, if the city was attacked, that city dwellers could come here and gain some additional protection. Here you can see some of the much older cannons, the housing that they would have sat on, and the direction that would have faced in order to help protect St. Augustine. Here you can actually see what this stone is made of. It was cemented by thousands or millions of years of seashells and having acid kind of leach down through the different layers that cemented them into essentially a stone. Really interesting to see, and that it is certainly a stone. As much as I want to touch it, I know that I would damage it, so I'm not going to. Here you can see part of the old original wall that completely surrounded St. Augustine. And as you work down the wall, over in the distance there was the original gate, one of the original gates into St. Augustine. And that would have been guarded as well and protected from having invaders try to get in. History's pretty cool. This would have been the other perspective, looking down the river. That would have been protected by Fortress Matanzas. So in looking this direction, these would have been small sloops that would have come, but very few ever got through because of the fort to the south. here are some pretty succinct examples of the artillery that was used. This was a mortar that would have kind of lobbed shells over an embankment or wall into the city. This is more of a howitzer that would have also been able to launch exploding shells over the walls. The difference here is that this was smaller and obviously much more mobile. And then these are examples of cannons that would have shot solid iron balls into the oncoming ships and or potentially even oncoming soldiers. Interesting how they used rounded roofs to support the weight of the walkway above them. The arches work very well to support that massive amount of weight up above. Well, this would put a new emphasis on a king-size bed, but I imagine there were probably 6 or 7 guys that were laying side by side here. Off in the distance there is a fireplace, more used for cooking than actually staying warm. I don't think they needed it much to stay warm here. Here's the door, you can see where the feet would have gone in. And we're going to try to sneak a peek here. Oh, it's a pretty small space, but very dark. Here it shows that this would have been a toilet and water would have come in and taken the waste out into the bay. Interesting way to flush. Not very environmentally conscious. Well, here is Chief Osceola. He was the chief of the Seminoles and fought vigorously against European invaders, I'm sure from his perspective, to try to keep his people free.
It's just a... Yeah, we can read about it while we wait for them to come back.
Here's the powder room. I'm going to go ahead in this little tunnel here. This is very dark. But this is where powder would have been stored. Definitely would have kept it unexposed to the elements. But everything would have needed to have come in and out this little door. Here is the Fort Chapel. Very basic at this point, but an obvious altar. Probably some sort of a crucifix or other Catholic relic would have gone there. And the rest of the congregation, the soldiers, would have been here. Here you can see an officer's quarters. Bunk beds instead of having to sleep shoulder to shoulder, as well as going upstairs. This was more what it would have looked like when it was occupied by the British. At some point, all of these soldiers had to eat. So this was the provisional store. I would say that in all likelihood, not only would you have had plenty of fruits and vegetables, but also some delicious rum, if I were guessing. So, great way to spend an evening with your provisions that you were allotted. Here you can see how the interior rooms were built, and then how sand would have been packed around the rooms, and then you would have had the steps and surface built over top of them. Using the arches was an ingenious way to not have to use pillars and other supporting structures.
Los oídos. Cover your ears. Tápense los oídos.
Another ship bites the dust. Interestingly, this moat space that you see here the entire way around the Castillo was used essentially as a barnyard. Even when there was other fighting forces going on, they were fairly well protected. It also would have made things much more difficult if the fighting soldiers from the other side would have been trying to get past cattle, chickens, and pigs while trying to attack the fort. Here we are in historic St. Augustine. Obviously very touristy at this point, but back then it would have been touristy too. Just that people would have been coming from Europe as Spaniards and Italians, French, all trying to do business here in the New World. Oh, there's my favorite friend on the phone. Bet she's talking to someone special. The National Park Service rebuilt the walls here, and you can get to see a little bit what it looked like. And as I said, from the fort, here are the actual gates to St. Augustine. And this would have been facing roughly due north. So there'll be another one down to the south. We're going to keep on moving and finish checking out St. Augustine. All right, everyone, here is the oldest wooden schoolhouse in the United States, here in St. Augustine Park. As we continue down the historic street in St. Augustine, not a lot of change. Definitely some Spanish influence, and a lot of the coquina stone is used here. This would be a good example of when they were covered with a limestone plaster to help waterproof them. All right, outdoorsmen, wrapping up the trip that my wife and I were able to have in Castillo De San Marcos. It was awesome to see some very original American history, and then to experience the beautiful Florida weather and see all the amazing people that were there. It was absolutely awesome. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, go ahead and give me the thumbs up. And if you want, you can even subscribe. Until next time, get outdoors.